Welcome everybody to Congregation Va-Dor's Chat with Two Rabbis. We are thrilled to have everybody together tonight. We are going to start this program tonight with prayers for those who are experiencing the worst tragedy. I just can't even imagine what they're going through tonight and every day since last Thursday in Surfside, praying that their people, that their relatives, their friends, their family are still alive, and with hope. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rabbi Barry and Rabbi Kahn for their prayers, and then we'll have a moment of silence.
Rabbi Kahn, as is my custom, I'll defer to you. If you would like to start out with a prayer for the folks at Surfside.
I would just like to thank Sharon for, starting this way. I think it's very appropriate, and every day we hope to be able to read or hear that another survivor has been found, or survivors have been found, and so far our wishes and our dreams of that happening haven't been fulfilled. But our hearts, even if we don't say a word, our hearts obviously, since we first heard of this tragedy, have been filled with prayers, hoping for people to survive and hoping for survivors to be found. And we always have to have hope. We always have to have hope in our hearts and our minds. There have been other terrible situations of a kind of similar nature where survivors have been found way past the time where anyone thought it was possible. And so we hope and we pray that God will bring another miracle, because that's what it would be, to find survivors in the rubble, in the ruins. But we hope that that will happen. We also hope that those that have been wounded are still in the hospital will have a full and speedy recovery and be returned to their families, and that the families themselves will find the strength to carry on and to continue hoping. And if they are tragically faced with the terrible news that everyone is dreading hearing, and that some, I think 11 families have already received such terrible news, that they will, God will grant them the comfort and the peace to be able to deal with the terrible, terrible loss that they're experiencing. So I think the hopes of not just the Jewish people, certainly, but the hopes of people around the world, any human beings who read about this and hear about it, are hoping for positive outcomes, which again would be like a miracle, but miracles have happened before, and we hope that they continue to happen.
I'll add my voice to that of Rabbi Kahn in thanking Sharon for beginning with this moment of solidarity with the people in Miami at Surfside. And we hope for them strength and comfort during this horrible time. There's nothing that we can say or do to take away the sadness that they must feel right now. But there has been an outpouring of support from not just the Jewish community, but from around the world. And let us all lend our voices and our material support, as Va-Dor is doing, in order that they should know that our hearts are with them, our hopes are with them, our commiseration is with them. We stand in solidarity with them. And I hope that in some small measure, this will help them bravely face this horrible ordeal. And I hope that we also may understand through this and other tragedies the precariousness of human life, cherish every day, cherish every opportunity we have to express our love for others, and to cherish life, which is a miracle. Amen from both of us.
Now, if we could have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. I'm going to play a Mishaberach that I put together.
אבותינו משברך אמותינו הוא יברך את החולים משברך אבותינו משברך אמותינו הוא יברך את החולים וישלח להם מהרה רפואה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף ונאמר אמן משברך אבותינו משברך אמותינו הוא יברך את החולים
I'd just like to share with everybody here tonight. I thank you for being with us. I thank you for praying and hoping for the best outcome, no matter what it might be. But Va-Dor will be donating 15% of their contributions made during the month of July and donating it to the families of the Surfside Tragedy. It's the least that we could do as a congregation. So with that.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for introducing this part of our discussion. And we might have to wait a very, very long time for divine intervention, but we don't have to wait any time for us to get involved and for us to help out and for us to do what we can so that we can bring hopefully a little bit of healing and solace and comfort. So I'm glad to see that Va-Dor is doing that. And I just want to share with everyone what I'm sure we're all aware of, that we walk around and see people all around us who are also suffering in many ways. They haven't lost a loved one necessarily in such a tragic and horrific episode, but people all around us are suffering and going through difficult times. And we do have the capacity to help get them through this period and to make their lives better and to try to appreciate what they're going through. So when we see people that might be giving us a hard time or people that maybe aren't as cheerful as we think they should be, we always should try to be understanding of them and see maybe if there's something we can do to help lift their spirits and get them through whatever it is they're suffering through, because they don't let us know. You know, they look like they're doing okay, and they might not be. They might be going through some ordeals. So let us be sensitized to this. And also, you know, there were warning signs about what was going on here. Warning signs that looked like they were ignored. And our country's now looking to see what we can do to support our infrastructure and to try to build for the future and to try to prevent tragedies. And I hope that we'll take measures in all regards so that we can try to avoid this type of catastrophe in the future. Rabbi Kahn, we got a fascinating Torah passage this week, one of my favorites, Pinchas, and curious to see what you make of it. And then I'll share my thoughts. By the way, I just want everyone to know that, as I've mentioned many times before, I'm extremely grateful to Rabbi Kahn for joining us all these weeks. I've always tried to find Orthodox rabbis to join us, or any rabbis. Most rabbis are just busy doing their own thing. Rabbi Kahn's been very generous with his time and with his intelligence and sharing it with us. This is our last official time together, but I'm sure we'll be together in the future. But Again, I wanted to thank him, and also, if there's any questions that you have for an Orthodox rabbi and always wanted to ask, speak now or forever hold your peace, because I'm not sure when is the next time we'll have the pleasure of being with him. So hit him with your best shot, your best questions, if you have anything that you'd like to know about. And Rabbi Kahn, I turn it over to you for your commentary on Pinchas.
Thank you very much. As Rabbi Silver said, very unusual and interesting, fascinating Torah portion. We'll start off really right at the start, for which purpose we have to go back to last week, to the end of last week's Torah portion, because that's where the events occurred that really segue into what happens at the beginning of this week's Torah portion. And basically, and we actually touched upon this last week, the king of Moab, the king of a nation where the Jewish people, as they traveled in the wilderness towards the land of Canaan, which would ultimately become the land of Israel, came up to this country, approached the borders of this country of Moab, and Moab was trying to do everything it could to protect themselves from what they perceived to be a threat from the Jewish people. The Jewish people had no interest in their land, had no interest in fighting with them, and wanted to do everything they could to avoid any kind of conflict with them. But they were very worried about the situation, the Moabites were. And ultimately they came to an extreme, what they viewed as a possible solution. It was an extreme action of sending their daughters out to seduce Jewish men, and not just to seduce them, but to convince them in the course of the seduction to bow down to their idols and to worship their God, their idolatrous God that they worship. And some Jewish men succumbed and were caught up in this situation, in this incident, which led to all kinds of negative ramifications. But in the meantime, and one of the tribal princes amongst the Jewish people himself went ahead and took a Moabite princess and publicly said, "I'm going to be with this girl, and it's okay. There's no problem. It's acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it." And tried to convince others to do so and to follow his lead. And then the famous Pinchas, who this week's Torah portion is named after, or in English his name is Phineas, and so Pinchas went and took the law clearly into his own hands, and he killed both the Jewish man whose name was Zimri, the tribal prince, and the Moabite princess who the Torah identifies, which is kind of interesting, and gives her name as Cosbi, the daughter of Tzur. And so he kills both of them, and this puts an end to the punishment that was happening over this whole incident, to the divine punishment or divine wrath that was happening to the Jewish people. And that's how last week's Torah portion ends. This week's Torah portion begins with God stating that Pinchas did the right thing. His zealotry and his zealous actions actually were the right thing to do in this extreme situation, and he brought a close to the transgressions and the sinning and the idolatry, and everyone was able to move on after that point. It certainly raises a very, very interesting question, which is, in Judaism, is the idea of taking the law into one's own hands ever acceptable, ever considered legally valid? In general, if it were not for this incident, I think everyone would say, no, that's not okay. We don't take the law into our own hands. And the Torah is full of all kinds of information about setting up courts and commandments to set up courts and to have a judicial system and a system of jurisprudence. And a lot of details are given in different places in the Torah about the laws and the rules and procedures of the court system and the laws that the judges should follow and that the people should follow. And the idea of a person taking the law into his own hands, especially to carry out a capital punishment, to kill two people, is obviously highly, highly unusual and unprecedented in the Torah. So there's a lot of discussion in the Talmud about it. And basically what comes out of that discussion is that this was a very, very unique situation. And there are only very specific circumstances where a person would ever be allowed to do something like this, to take the law into his own hands to such an extent that he or she brings the life of another person to an end. And it could only be in a case similar to this, where there is a great, what's called by the Talmud, a chilul Hashem. That means a desecration of God's name is taking place, and it's in public, and it's bringing, sins and transgressions. It's inspiring more people to sin and transgress, and it involves idolatry. Basically, all the things you can think of that would make it an extreme case that action has to be taken immediately to put a stop to it. It has to be those kinds of various unique circumstances for it to happen. And the Talmud goes out of its way to say this applied in the time of Pinchas, obviously, because he was rewarded for what he did. But in our time, again, as I've mentioned before, when even the Jewish courts for the last 2,000 years don't have the authority to carry out any kind of corporal punishment or capital punishment, this idea certainly would not apply. So it certainly is not something nowadays that, even if someone thought might be legitimate, could possibly be justified. So I have a little more to say about incidents later in the Torah portion, but I'll stop here just because this is the opening kind of scene of the Torah portion, and one that brings about all kinds of interesting discussions.
All right. Well, you do have a gift for understatement sometimes, Rabbi Kahn. You said that there were some negative ramifications involved in the Israelite men cavorting with the Moabite women. The negative ramifications he's talking about was a plague where God slaughters thousands of people because of the alleged immorality, which seems to be just a bit of an overreaction, perhaps. And then you have that compounded by another overreaction with Pinchas. Interesting that the woman who was acting immorally is named Cosby. So we had the same thing here in the United States, where someone named Cosby was acting immorally as well. So the Bible often does predict what's going on now in modern days, so that it does possess the gift of prophecy in many ways. And so now we have Cosby, who is acting immorally as well. And so now you got Pinchas, who takes matters into his own hands, as Rabbi Kahn says, and goes after Cosby and the Jewish guy. Again, the traditionalists tend to over-embellish the horrors, the bad things that these people do. I think the Torah is rather scant. It doesn't say like they were going around having sex out in the open and he was telling everybody, hey, look at me, you should do the same thing. It's just that the Torah just says that they did this, and doesn't really say that it was done out in public or that he was parading it around or anything, as far as I know. But apparently, according to the Torah, he didn't really try to hide the fact either. But then Pinchas comes over and executes them both, which also seems a little bit extreme. And then you have God saying, because you were so zealous and righteous, I'm now going to stop slaughtering all the Jewish people, and I'm going to make you the priest. And I'm going to give you a high position of honor, because everybody else was just sitting around doing nothing, and here you are, and you're so righteous that you killed people, and I'll also extend that honor to your kids as well. I find the whole situation rather hideous, which is like reason number 12,002 why I don't think this comes from a divine being, and certainly not a benevolent being. Seems a little violent to me. Also seems a little irrational, but that's okay. This was a great way, if you wanted to increase the attendance at synagogues, if you had like cultish women dancing around naked and inviting the men to come and have sex with them, you could probably really get a a lot of people coming out to synagogue in modern times where you don't usually do that, but it was considered a little bit excessive. And I guess they didn't want to create that much attention, but in actuality, this was a pretty bad thing because they were also subverting the religion of the Jewish people. It's kind of funny that this congregation the founding rabbi was my dad. And my dad used to take, just like most rabbis, he'd take certain sections of these passages and sedras and read them. And other portions he wouldn't really pay much attention to. So I'm not sure, Rabbi Kahn, what your custom is or how you do it, but he would never read the entire sedra. It was just too long and everything had to be short. And so he would take certain chunks of the sedras that seemed to convey an important message. So I listened to my dad preach Pinchas for years and read Pinchas for years. I never heard about this episode because as a liberal reform rabbi, this is a little too grisly, gruesome, grotesque, and gratuitous in violence. He liked the other part, which I always read and I always appreciated, that of Zepholachad. Zepholachad was the daughters of Zepholachad, and they came to Moses and said, our father died in the wilderness and he has no male heirs. So we want to acquire his possessions. We'd like to stand in the shoes of him so that his name wouldn't be erased. And Moses, instead of as a male saying, what are you talking about? Women don't have the right to own property. It's never been that way and it never will. They challenge the status quo and he submits it to divine principles of justice. Or according to the Torah, he asks God what to do. And God says, hey, they're right. Change the rules. And then there's a whole new rule about inheritance. And from now on, a new precedent is established. It doesn't grant full equal rights to women, but it's a step in that direction. If there's no male heirs, let them take the possession. Of course, you have to realize they're in a desert. I'm not sure what their father might have possessed, certainly not much land if they're roaming through the desert, which means that historians think that this is anachronistic, meaning that this is something that took place after they arrived in Canaan, and it was backtracked into the desert situation so that Moses could make the pronouncement so people would pay attention to it, as opposed to Joe Schmo or whoever it might be. So, but the principle is good. Be willing to change. Judaism always believes in an increase in rights and freedoms for people. And we always challenge the status quo, which is a good thing. So I like this passage, one of my favorites. And it's a great passage for people who believe in civil rights and women's rights, standing alongside a very, what I consider to be primitive passage. Rabbi Kahn, give you a chance to correct the error in my ways, as I always do, and to share your thoughts and opinions. Then we can open it up to others.
Sure. The story of Zepholachad and his daughters is a wonderful story. Actually, the issue wasn't so much the possessions, as you mentioned, the scant possessions that the father might have possessed in the wilderness, but the whole issue really was, and this was something that everyone was focused on at that time, was once the Jewish people come into the land of Israel, how are they going to divide up the land, and how is that going to be divided up from parents to children, and what's going to happen in the future? And that it was something of incredible importance. And so Moses, the ruling that he issued, that the daughters would be able to inherit their father was in fact an issue for the future, to say, when we enter the land of Israel, instead of the daughters not receiving the portion that would have gone to their father, they were to be given that portion and to be given land that they would own in place of their father. And so it is very significant, as you point out, and something that's I do think is a good nice lesson to kind of focus on in terms of how things arrangements were made so that they would be allowed to take over the property that would have gone to their farther in the future once the people passed into the land of Israel. One other point in the Torah portion, which I do want to mention, is the transition, or I should say the projected transition of power from Moses to Joshua, in Hebrew Yehoshua, and that comes up in this week's Torah portion where God says, let Yehoshua, let Joshua know, God says this to Moshe, to Moses, let him know that in the future he will be the one to lead the Jewish people into the land of Canaan, again, which became the land of Israel, and begin to prepare him for that transition. And it's very interesting to delve a little bit into the personality of Joshua, of Yehoshua. He's basically portrayed in the Torah as a follower, as an extremely loyal follower of Moshe. And he's actually, at one point, he's called the Na'ar, the lad of Moshe, who would go around and serve him and help him and study, always by his side, and always there to study and listen to his words and help him in any way that he could. But he was not viewed by the people, apparently, as a powerful, charismatic leader. And so what we see at in the book of Joshua, which follows in our Tanakh, in our Bible, it follows after the end of the 5 books of Moses. The next book is the book of Joshua. And what we find there is that almost everyone says the same 2 words to him in one form or another, which is chazak ve'emat, be strong and be courageous, which is great. It's a wonderful message, but after a while, you get the feeling that everyone was concerned that he really was not the kind of guy to be strong and courageous. And he was the person to lead them in 24 years, I think, certainly about 2 decades of battles and wars to ultimately conquer the land of Israel, what became the land of Israel. And so that it's interesting when we think about it, how could anyone take over and fill the shoes of Moshe, the shoes of Moses, the lawgiver, the leader, the one who took them out of Egypt, who did all of the incredible things and was facilitated all of these amazing miracles? How could you take over? That's the ultimate case of a tough act to follow. And Joshua, Yehoshua had to follow and take over after Moses. And the amazing thing is that he was ultimately successful, and the people totally embraced his leadership and accepted him, which I think shows, once again, because we see this with Moses early on, it's not about charisma and it's not about incredible rhetorical skills. It's really about sincerity and dedication. And once people saw that that's what Joshua, Yehoshua was all about, it took some time to see that he really had the goods, he had the right stuff, but not in a showy kind of fake way, but in a very sincere, dedicated way. Then they accepted him, and he led the Jewish people for the critical period after the death of Moses, and then taking them into the land of Israel, and then leading them in battle and settling them, initiating the process of settling the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So very interesting character, and he starts to come into his own a little bit in this week's Torah section.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why he was successful is because there was a smooth transition of power. There were no Christian white nationalist mobs trying to threaten the transition of power, and everybody went along with the flow, which allowed the allegiance to be transferred properly, which was a good thing. Joshua wasn't all that weak. I mean, he destroyed the people of Jericho and committed genocide against all of those folks. And like you say, Rabbi Kahn, he did come into his own and seemed to be every bit as ruthless as some of his predecessors in many ways. But you're right. I agree with you. He was extremely loyal to Moses, even when there were people running around prophesying. Joshua goes up to Moses and says, "Hey, look at these guys. They're prophesying. They're threatening your authority." And that he was watching his back. And Moses said, "I wish everybody would prophesy. That's a good thing. Don't worry about it." But he was exceptionally loyal. I was curious, Rabbi Kahn, to ask you, what do you think about Pinchas? Do you agree with his actions? If you were there and you saw Cosby running around with a Jewish guy, would you have picked up your sword and run him through? Or do you think that was a little excessive?
I would never predict what I would do in such different times and different circumstances or different situations. But
I think I can make a prediction. I don't think you'd be taking up a sword and running them through and stabbing her through her stomach. I don't really see you doing that.
I can tell you this: I hope I would not be one of the guys running after the Midianite women. I don't know, but I don't know. I can't. I really can't say.
No, I don't see you doing that either.
The Moabite women. I don't trust myself either way to know exactly what I would do, but let's put it this way. I think to ask the question in a fair way, we would have to say, if there actually was, and I understand that this is stretching the limits, Rabbi Silver, of your credulity or your imagination, but let's imagine that
those limits are pretty wide. I don't know if you can do that.
Let's imagine that there actually was this terrible plague in which thousands of Jews, thousands and thousands of Jewish people were dying because of these actions of immorality, sexual immorality, and idol worship. And then a person took an action, as Pinchas did, that put a stop to it and stopped the dying and the suffering, and put an end to that by killing two, high-level perpetrators. Let's say Zimri was a tribal prince. Cosby, the Torah says, was a princess of Moab. So then I think you have to kind of take that into perspective and say, wow, maybe we can begin to see if his actions really led to an end to the plague and the suffering and the death and the dying. Then maybe we would see his actions in a different light and understand a little bit about why the Torah rewards him for taking such a strong stand, you might say.
And what about God's actions in perpetrating a plague upon the people? I mean, the plague wipes out women too, who probably weren't cavorting with the Moabite men and children and stuff like that. Do you think that was a proper thing for God to do, to unleash a plague on them?
Well, I think there's a certain point that's inescapable in the Torah itself, and that point is that God is portrayed, as depicted to us in the Torah, as being extremely serious about the mission of the Jewish people, and extremely focused on the importance of the mission of the Jewish people, not just for them, but for the world, that this is part of God's plan, that the Jewish people will come into the land of Israel, and not just because they needed a nice place to live and it's comfortable and you can get a nice condo on the beach in Netanya. It's more than that. The idea is that the Jewish people have a mission that is tied up and has centrality, is connected to the God's desire and plan for the universe, for the world. And therefore, if the Jewish people stray from that mission, there are serious consequences. There's no way to escape that or avoid that. And we might look back and say, it's excessive, it's too much, why is this happening? But that's kind of, at least from the way the Torah presents it in many, many different cases, that's kind of the way it's presented to us. And I think the case can be made that kind of intervention in history, with suffering and tragedies happening to the Jewish people at different points, is something that continued. It's not just limited to what happened in the Torah. It continues certainly throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years of the other books of the Bible, where we see that if the Jewish people strayed, and certainly when they worshiped idols and things like that, or did other things that the Torah viewed as highly unacceptable, there was suffering that came with that. And from a traditionalist point of view, the idea is we might not like it, we might not embrace it or choose that concept for ourselves, but that certainly does seem to be the way that the Torah portrays God's viewpoint, as the Jewish people have a mission that's incredibly important, and it's important that they stick to it. And when they stray from it, very, very bad things can happen. And so I don't know what to make of that, more than the fact that it is what it is. It is an accurate depiction of the Torah's narrative.
Yeah, well, you say God was extremely serious and extremely focused. You could also say he was extremely vicious and extremely violent in wiping Jewish people out left and right, especially with the Babylonian destruction of the temple, which the Torah chalks up not to the fact that their defenses were weak, but they were worshiping the wrong gods or doing it the wrong way. And so God used the Babylonians to commit genocide against them, that's a pretty harsh. And you figure, well, if God's wiping out thousands of people, why not just kill off another couple of people like Pinchas did and try to put an end to it? But I kind of like the approach that Moses used when God was getting a little carried away. He didn't go around killing people. God did it, but he said to God, hey, God, you know what? I don't think you really want to destroy the Jewish people. That's going to make you look bad. And so then God changed his mind. Or Abraham, when God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham said to God, hey, you know what? That's not such a good idea, and bargained with him. Maybe instead of Pinchas murdering 2 more people, he could have said to the Jewish people, let's all collectively ask God to stop doing this. And maybe that would put an end to the plague instead of compounding the violence. But you're right, we have different perspectives on this story like we do on the other ones. But we do both agree about Zepholachad. She was the daughters of Zepholachad. They have chutzpah. They challenge the status quo. They advance human rights, and we can all admire that, right? That's a good thing.
Absolutely.
All right, anybody else want to share any thoughts about that or anything else that's going on? Who wants to get the ball rolling? Go ahead, Emily.
I was listening to both of you, and last night I watched the final episode, you will laugh, of my favorite all-time TV show, The Vikings. Now, the Vikings were fighting really a religious war against the Christians. And and they fought it everywhere. They fought it against the Russians. They fought it against the English. They fought it against the Muslims everywhere. And it reminded me very much of exactly what you were saying about the various battles, Joshua and his battle and some others. So I don't know. A lot of the world's wars are fought in the name of God, whether it's Odin or Jesus or Jehovah. A lot of wars are fought in their names, and a lot of people die.
Yeah, it's true. The problem is that the Western world, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, look to the Torah as authority and its justification. So if you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew and you say God wrote the Torah or had a hand in it, then these aren't just people fighting. This is God. This is the ultimate source of goodness and morality, authorizing mass murder and genocide because they're worshiping the wrong God. I had someone write a response to one of my Jewish Journal articles, and she was saying that, oh yeah, Pinchas did the right thing. He acted morally. And it's like, well, what kind of morality is that? Is there no objective standard of morality, or is it just, well, the Torah says it's okay, so it's okay. So the Torah says genocide is okay, so hey, I guess it's okay. Torah says murder is okay, I guess it's okay. To me, that's the opposite of morality. It means that we have no morality at all. It's just, well, this book says you can commit genocide and murder. The Torah condones slavery and all types of other hideous practices. So if that's your ultimate authority, then there is no morality. And the problem is, then everybody learns from Jewish people that anything goes. All you have to do is say, my God told me that I can execute these people, or I can commit genocide against these people because they're not worshiping the right God. And I just think as Jews, we have some responsibility to try to correct that record.
In direct contrast to the 10 Commandments, in direct contrast to thou shalt not kill.
Well, actually, and Rabbi Kahn can back me up on this, the commandment dealing with killing doesn't say al tahog, which would be that thou shalt not kill. It says al tirzach, thou shalt not murder. So that gives you an escape clause. Murder is the unjustified taking of human life, but according to the traditionalists, what Pinchas did was a murder because he was justified because God said it's okay. the genocide that was committed against Jericho and other places, that's not murder because God says it's okay. And I think that as Jews, we need to evolve beyond the point that we're going to let our book and our tradition be used to support genocide and murder. Because if it's true that if God says you can commit genocide, that justifies it, you've now justified 9/11. Because now these people say, well, my book says that I need to kill these people in America because they're worshiping the wrong God. And by the morality of the Torah, you really don't have any good argument against them, other than you're reading the wrong book. But then you come down to, well, why is that the wrong book? I think there needs to be objective standards other than, well, God said it's okay, so it's okay. And as Jewish people who care about justice, we're on very thin ice when we allow our book to be used to support genocide and murder, in my opinion. Rabbi Kahn, what say you about these things?
I want to pick up with the point that Emily made, but take it in a little bit of a different direction, and that is that rather than look at the Torah as a book that somehow brings to the world the idea of the permissibility of genocide and killing, the Torah brought to the world lo tirtzach, thou shalt not murder, as one of the 10 commandments, exactly what Emily just pointed out, and so many other critical lessons and critical values that the Torah brought to the world at a time when these things could not at all be taken for granted, and that began the building of what we call Western civilization. I also want to make the point that I do not believe that there is anyone around, be he or she a Christian or a Muslim or a member of any other religion, who is committing violence in the world today and is justifying it based on the Torah. And 9/11, they justified it based on the Quran and their reading and interpretations of the Quran. And obviously, throughout the millennia, when Christians were involved, for example, in the Crusades or other periods of just, almost endless massacring and killing, they didn't base it. I don't think they looked at the Torah. I think they based it on their belief system and on the New Testament. And of course, there's all kinds of ways to say, well, how could they base it when it says this and it says that and it says this? And it is a terribly tragic reality in our world and in our universe and the human history, that there are people who decide to do completely indefensible things, and they base it on certain texts. And I will agree and concede to Rabbi Silver's basic point that the possibility, of course, exists that a person could look at the Torah and take certain verses and take certain sections or narratives or stories and say, oh, if it says this, then violence must be okay, or killing someone must be okay. But that's really not how the system works. We can look at Jewish history for the last 2,000 years, and the Jews, wherever they went and wherever they lived, were the most peaceful people, and yet they were dedicated and devoted to keeping the laws of the Torah. So the Torah itself did not create a bloodthirsty, violent people. The Torah created a people who, again, as I said, wherever they went around the world during the years of their dispersion, were known as the most peaceful people, unfortunately so peaceful that sometimes their neighbors decided, wow, these people are easy pickings. We can take their property, take their wives, take their daughters, and ultimately sometimes take their lives. But we were known as just a very peace-loving, peaceful people who wanted to be left alone and just study our holy books and observe the commandments and take care of our families and be with our families. So I think a question really has to be asked, which is, if the Torah is such a book full of violence and ruthlessness, why is it that the people who were so devoted to its study and carrying out its commandments were peace-loving, peaceful people for so many thousands of years? And I'm not discounting the fact that there were times of tremendous wars before that and battles and violence. There definitely was. I'm talking about, again, the last stretch of 2,000 years of Jewish history. So I believe the question is a balanced one and a very interesting one.
Rabbi Kahn, course, I'd love to respond. And this is one of the reasons why I'm going to miss these discussions, because you and I can look at the exact same thing and have two different ways of viewing them, and we're still able to converse in a congenial manner. So you have given the very articulate traditional response to Emily's observations, and I just want to offer a different way of viewing it. First of all, every group of people they justify their own actions. I mean, even the Japanese justify their attack on Pearl Harbor, saying, well, America was getting a little aggressive. I mean, every group justifies their actions. So we need to realize that human tendency to say whatever we do is right, especially with the Torah. If you think God wrote it, then of course you're going to say, well, whatever it says must be right because it comes from a divine authority. But let's look at it objectively. Okay, first of all, it wasn't that the Torah came along and said, don't kill, and therefore that's when humanity started to realize that killing was wrong. Okay, every society, all of them had rules saying don't kill. This was not anything that Jews invented. This is something that Jews absorbed from the general milieu. Any society where they didn't have such a rule, where people just went around killing each other, would last for about 2 seconds. So thou shalt not kill was involved. You could find that in the Egyptian code, the code of Hammurabi. You could find that in anything. But what happened in the Torah was it didn't say thou shalt not kill. It said thou shalt not murder. And then all these exceptions were made. Oh, well, you know, that guy killed one of your kinspeople, so you can kill him. That's not murder, that's justified. Oh, this guy, he was picking up sticks on the Sabbath. You can kill him, that's not murder, that's justified. Oh, that woman there, I'm not sure how I would figure this out, but she wasn't a virgin when she got married. I don't know how you would know that, but the husband says so, so I guess we can wipe her out too. You see that guy there? He's not worshiping the right way. And you see those people, they're worshiping the wrong God. And you see this guy, he violated some rule. I mean, but before you know it, there's so many exceptions that it doesn't have any meaning anymore. So the Torah's admonition of thou shalt not murder wasn't quite the advance that a lot of Jewish nationalists would want to make it out to be. Now, let's also take the folks on 9/11. Now, Rabbi Kahn, you say, well, that has nothing to do with the Torah. They don't even believe in the Torah. They believe in the Quran. Those who have studied the Quran and the Torah notice these two books share a lot in common. In fact, if you want to find a blueprint for ISIS, just read Deuteronomy. It says, kill all the men, spare the women, destroy their holy places, wipe out these people because they don't believe in the right God, and institute a type of law where women are treated like chattel and nobody has any rights at all. It's a nightmarish type of Sharia law. The Sharia law comes right out of Deuteronomy. And the genocide against people who disagree with you, Islam is largely copied from Judaism. What happened is the Jewish people, their influence extended down into the Middle East, and you have a mixture of the Torah and Arab tribalism, which is vicious and violent. And the Arabs were slaughtering each other and taking their women and property. And finally, the Arabs said, hey, you know what? This is crazy. Why are we killing each other? Let's all unite and kill everybody else. And they used the Torah as a blueprint to say that God's behind all this. The Quran and the teachings of genocide in God's name, murdering the non-believer, comes straight out of the Torah. It's not a coincidence. It's almost grafted word for word. And you can prove it because if you look around, you don't see other groups of people doing things quite as viciously and violently as the Muslims, who are our closest religious neighbor. You don't see Hindus running around murdering non-believers all over. It happens, but it's an aberration. Or Buddhists, they're usually pretty peaceful folks. Yeah, there's some that kill people, but they didn't borrow from our Torah. Our Torah justifies genocide, and they got it from us. By the way, the Christians did the same thing, because God in the Torah is saying, kill the non-believer, and the Christians were saying, yeah, that's true. And you Jews, you're now non-believers. We're the new Jews, and you guys are now the non-believers. So they went around killing us. So the violence from Christianity and Islam comes right out of us. If you think about it, blind faith in a God who orders death to the non-believers is a virus, and Christianity and Islam are the variants. And Christianity and Islam is a more lethal variant than Judaism because it incorporates also heaven and hell. The idea that God's going to send non-believers to hell, so you're justified in killing them now because some of them might get the message and come around before they get sent to hell. Regarding Jewish people being peaceful, we need to look at this. Is this objective truth? Or is this our own bias coming through? How would you look at that objectively? It's hard for us to crawl out of our own skin and look at us as an outsider would. I will agree with you here, Rabbi Kahn, that the Jewish people have been extremely peaceful and have been a source of peace in post-biblical days. That's why we have to re-examine the Torah. However, one could say the reason for that is because if you're a Jewish guy living in Europe, surrounded by Christians who think you're the devil and are putting you in a ghetto and think you killed Jesus, you're not going to go running around starting a war against the Christians because you'll annihilate yourselves. We were a very small community, threatened and beleaguered by all sides. We were in no position to start killing other people. If we tried it, we would have been wiped out. And we can't kill each other because there weren't that many of us left. And so the peacefulness was kind of something that was imposed. However, as you know, when the Jews became more powerful and the Maccabees achieved a victory over the Syrian Greeks, and they came into their own and they had the power over their Holy Land, what did they do? They forcefully converted the Idumeans. They went in a war and fought them and either killed them or forced them to convert. They later became the Samaritans. And so when we had the opportunity, we demonstrated that we had the capacity to be violent. But for whatever reason, I agree with you that we're peaceful now. And we do have about a 2,000-year track record of being a source of peace and love. And I just think the way to bring that into fruition would be to re-examine our Torah so that it's not used as a pretext for violence and genocide anymore as it is right now. Our future is bleak with radical Islam. Radical Islam is probably the most dangerous force on the planet, and they're going to get their hands on nuclear weapons. And when that day comes, we might find that the United States no longer exists because of teachings right out of our Torah, adopted by the Quran, that now comes back to haunt us. So I think we have an obligation to do something about that.
I want to respond, but I want to give others a chance, and I've spoken a lot tonight. So I just want to say one thing, and that is this. It's rare that I have disagreed with you, Rabbi Silver, as strenuously and as passionately and as profoundly as I disagree with the points that you made about Sharia law coming right out of Deuteronomy. I totally reject that concept and that idea.
Well, I've been trying for 6 months to get you to agree.
No, you succeeded.
Forcefully and vehemently. I'm glad I brought it out before we're done. So
right here.
Get it out of me.
Right here at the end, you definitely brought it out.
I've been trying my best, believe me.
I'm absolutely positive that if you spoke to devout Muslims and you said to them, you explained to them your thesis that their holy book, the Quran, simply came right out of Deuteronomy, they would reject it. I think maybe not as passionately as I do, but they would certainly reject that idea. And I'm not.
So they shoot you.
I'm not unaware of the fact that scholars and historians have talked about the threads that can be seen in connecting certain things, ideas and concepts in the Torah and into Christianity, and ideas and concepts into Islam. I'm aware of those things, although by far not an expert in that area, in those areas, but I'm aware of those things. But Judaism has to be viewed, I believe, and the Torah has to be viewed independently, and it has to be looked at into how it actually was lived by its adherents. And if we were to take upon ourselves as Jews the responsibility for the horrific violence that Muslims have committed since the inception of their religion and that Christians have committed since the inception of their religion, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice is not strong enough. We're doing ourselves something that is a travesty. It's a travesty of justice. It's a travesty of history. Judaism needs to be looked at independently. And when one does that, certainly we have problems. Certainly we have texts that are very difficult. We have events and narratives and stories and things that have happened that Jewish people have been involved in and done that are difficult to explain or sometimes impossible to explain. But let's focus on our books and our actions and not take the least bit of responsibility from what Muslims and Christians or any other group has done. Let's not connect that and tie that and throw that on our backs as well. That idea, I completely have to reject.
Well, this is good. Let me just respond to that and then we'll open it up, because I think that we should take responsibility. That's the whole point of being Jewish and religious, to atone for our sins and to acknowledge responsibility. Now, I'm going to agree with you. If you asked a Muslim, did you get your ideas from the Torah? They would say, of course not, the Torah. No. They don't even believe that there's such a thing as Judaism. They claim that Moses was a Muslim. You're probably aware of that. They claim that Abraham was a Muslim and that the prophets were Muslims. They have misappropriated our religion to make it, to whitewash it like Judaism doesn't even exist. So they're not going to say they got anything from Judaism, but historically we know exactly where the Quran comes from. They have stories about Moses, Isaiah, Adam and Eve, Noah, Jacob, Isaac. The stories are all twisted and warped so that they come out looking better, but the whole religion is based and emerged right out of Judaism. And I assure you that Sharia law and the genocidal horrors committed by ISIS come straight out of Deuteronomy. I know that you're familiar with the passages, Rabbi Kahn. I know that you are aware that God said to Moses and to Joshua, slaughter all these people because they don't believe in the right God. Get rid of them. And then he also said, kill all the men and leave the women for yourself, especially the ones who haven't known men. That's exactly what ISIS does. And it also tells the Jews to get rid of their holy places, and ISIS and these other Muslim groups wipe out the holy places of other religions. Then it tells them how to treat women. You stone women if they act immorally, if they're not virgins on marriage. The Sharia law is based on the Torah when it says execute a guy who's not observing God's laws properly. This is not a coincidence, nor could it be. Other Baha'is don't do that. Unitarians don't do that. The resemblance is stark and striking. And some of the passages are actually word for word grafted right out of Deuteronomy. I know it's unpleasant, but I think the first step towards maturity and responsibility is acknowledging where we went wrong and doing something about it. But I do agree with you in that limited sense. They would not, well, I mean, there's a lot of Muslim scholars that understand the Quran came out of the Torah, but the fanatics aren't going to attribute anything to Judaism because they don't even think there is a religion of Judaism. All right, anybody else want to share some thoughts? Rabbi Kahn, you're welcome to respond, or we can open it up. Who wants to?
Let's totally open it up, and then if there's time in the end, I'll give one more little point.
Sounds good. Who wants to jump in? We must.
I know Valerie and Mishka wanted to say something.
Go ahead.
Well, right now it's okay. I think that at this day and age, and in this world, and at the position and at the time in history that we are, I think people have to take responsibility for their own actions. And I'm talking about whether you're an ultra-Orthodox, or whether you're a Reformed, or whether you're a conservative, or whether you're a radical. People have to take responsibility and pay the price for their own actions. And if it involves violence, and if it involves violent retaliation, then that's what needs to be done. You know, there's an expression, sometimes anecdotal expressions are very true. Good guys finish last, and that doesn't come from nowhere. This is true throughout history. Good guys finish last. You know, turn your swords into plows, sheds, and you know what happens? You lose your country, you lose your nation, you lose your religion, you lose your family, you lose everything, okay? If you don't stand up and fight back. So, you know, it's a question of, you know, to me, it's a question of what are your parameters and what are the circumstances and the society and the times that you live in. And that's where you have to judge what is going on now. You can look back in history and, you know, and as Rabbi Kahn said, you have to take into account the times that people live in, you know, and in this day and in this age, I assume that people have to take responsibility for their own actions, regardless of what it is that they believe in.
Well, let me just respond to that, because I happen to agree with some of the points that you made. These people that are committing violent acts, the Muslim terrorists, I agree with you 100%. They have to take responsibility for what they're doing, and we have to hold them accountable. And I think they should be executed. And I think we should wipe out Hamas, and I think we should wipe out terrorist groups everywhere. I totally agree with you that. But if you're going to say people have to take responsibility for what they've done, we as Jews need to take responsibility for launching this concept of God, who's really a genocidal maniac, and who's launching genocidal war. So if you say that we all have to take responsibility, then we should. Words are powerful. There's only one letter difference between word and sword. So we need to take responsibility and accept that we have something to do with the ideology that fuels this. Now, also, you say that we have to fight back. And I say to you, if you want to fight back effectively, it's not just going after the symptom, but the cause. If you're suffering from cancer and you're just dealing with the little symptoms and you don't get to the cause of it, you're going to die. And if we only fight back against the people who are committing terrorist acts and don't fight the cause, which is brainwashing children to hate with the Quran, which is also based on the Torah, then we're not fighting back effectively. To fight effectively, we have to fight the battle of ideas. And this is a horrible idea of genocide that comes from the Torah. So the best way to fight back would be for the Jews to say, hey, look, guys, we're sorry we launched this concept and this belief in God who wants you to kill people. It's wrong. We say it's wrong, and you should say it's wrong. And let's get rid of this concept from all of our books. That's the effective way of fighting back. And I do believe of beating swords into plowshares. I do believe in fighting back against people who are violent, challenging their ideas and replacing them with peaceful ones. Anybody else?
Well, that's very, very good. But let me tell you something from my own experience, and I'm sure from many people's experience. And if you look back in history, you know, the more aggressive and violent you are, the more people are afraid of you, the less likely it is that they're going to come after you. Okay. If you're stronger than they are, they're not coming after you. Okay. If you're weaker than they are, and they see that you're weaker than they are, they're coming after you. Okay. And that's just human nature. You could talk religion as much as you want. That's human nature. When you see someone or something or some nation or some country that's weaker than you are, the tendency is to go after them, to take their lands or to take their possessions or to take their monies or to take their ideas or to take their concepts. Okay. The way you're going to fight people off is not necessarily through violence, but through strength. You know, I think it was Theodore Roosevelt, was it, that sent the white battleships around the world to say we're peace-loving people? But what was behind those turrets? Pretty damn big guns. And that's what kept the peace, not the white ship. What was behind the white ships is what kept the peace. And, you know, you have to be realistic. And I know that how you feel in your concepts. And I completely agree with you that, you know, where do you start? Rationalization. But you're living in a real world. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. You're not disagreeing with anything I said. You say I need to be realistic. I'm the one who just said we should wipe out Hamas. That's more realistic and more violent than most Israelis are willing to go, or even the Republicans. I'm as realistic as you get. I'm not disagreeing.
No. Let's not go Republicans and Democrats. Let's just say human nature. Okay?
I don't. Valerie,
let's not make this political.
With all due respect, I wasn't making it political. and I don't need to be censored. Okay, I'm saying
No
I'm
one's
even
censoring
more.
you, but you brought up politics. Please don't do that. It's not political. It's a question of human survival. It's a question of concepts. It's a question of perspectives. It's a question of weak versus strong.
I'm
Okay?
not. I
It's
don't want
not
to
a
get
question
hung
of
up.
politics.
I don't want to get hung up on semantics, and it has nothing to do with politics. All I'm saying is, forget Republican. All I'm saying is the most radical right-wing people who advocate standing tough and strong against terrorist groups, as you just did, I'm even stronger. I don't need a lecture about being realistic. I am realistic. I say go after the terrorists and wipe them out. I'm saying Israel has to be strong or it'll be attacked. You're not saying anything that disagrees with me. All I'm saying is that in the battle for security, if you want to live in a world that's safe, then you have to fight the ideas that are the cause of the violence, not just the violent groups. Otherwise, you're trying to fight a cancer by going after the symptoms. You do have to be strong. You do have to fight against the terrorists. You do have to have Israel stronger than anyone who will be attacked. But if that's all you do, and you don't seek the cause of the violence are children are being brainwashed to be weapons of mass destruction, to think that they should go out and kill people. These people who we view as terrorists, they weren't born that way. They're not evil from birth. They got that way because somebody planted a virus in their head, which is a variant of the virus that we launched. And if we want to live in a safe world, we cannot just fight them militarily. We better fight the battle of ideas and try to create a peaceful world and try to stamp out irrational, dangerous religion where people worship a violent God. Because if that's all we do, if we just fight fire with fire, we're just going to make a bigger fire. And these Muslim countries are going to get nuclear weapons. No matter how strong Israel is, one of those nuclear weapons is going to land on Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. So we better challenge the ideas as well as the military. Otherwise, this world will be a very, very dangerous place, even more so than it is now. Anybody else? Wendy, go ahead.
I think Wendy, you have to unmute yourself.
Right, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, couple of things, though this is going a little bit off the topic. One, I want to thank Rabbi Kahn, even though I haven't been a very verbal participant in coming to these Torah chats. I've immensely enjoyed him and I will miss him.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I wanted him to know that, and I wish you and your family all the best in Israel and hope we see you in the fall. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, since the rabbi mentioned again, this is the last time to ask the Orthodox rabbi questions. Some friends live up near in Liberty. Just went back now after not being there for 2.5 years. And they mentioned all kinds of things that the Hasidim do that I found highly offensive, embarrassing. They were saying how they buy bicycles. They come and they spend the summer. They buy bicycles at Walmart for their 8 or 9 children, and because there's a 90-day return policy, after the kids use the bicycles all summer, they go and they return them. They mentioned how, in terms of getting an apartment, that they get married religiously, but they don't get married civilly. So if they have 9 children, husband and wife, according to U.S. law, they are not married. Therefore, she ends up getting all these benefits for the 9 kids because she's listed as an unwed mother. He ends up purchasing a house, and then she and the 9 kids move into that house, and the rent that she has to pay, which is a lower rent, goes to him, And again, the government thinks they're not married because he's the landlord. So the money is basically coming back to them. This kind of stuff, which I just found nauseating. So I don't know how much of this you're aware of, but I asked my friends, do you really know it? Is it just a rumor? And he said that no, he'd been in numerous situations where different people had brought it up. This guy used to be the head of maintenance at a Jewish nursing home. And he mentioned about people visiting on Yom Kippur and sneakily handing him sandwiches so that they could eat something when no one was looking. So I had explained to him, since he wasn't Jewish, that if you're not a well person or you're on a lot of meds, you can have a dispensation that you don't have to be fasting on Yom Kippur, but you wouldn't want to do it for everybody at shul. So, that part at least made sense. But I just thought this thing about the bicycles and using them all summer and then returning them like that, and the whole thing with not being legally married, I couldn't believe it.
Let's let Rabbi Kahn take a crack at that.
Wendy, first of all, thank you for your words. And you have been a very a frequent participant, and I enjoy always having you in the group. Listen, here's what I can tell you. As long as there's been Judaism around, there have been people who have picked and chosen, and they focused on certain areas and left out and somehow ignored conveniently other areas. And I think that's exactly the phenomenon you're talking about. And sometimes the way that works is that people become very, almost obsessed or very, very focused on the ritual law, the ritual aspects of the law, and might be incredibly meticulous about the laws of kashrut and what to eat and what not to eat and other type of observance of the Sabbath. But when it comes to business law, financial law, and by the way, there's an incredibly central rule in Judaism, which is called Dina de Malchuta Dina, which means the law of the country you live in must be followed. And therefore, no Jewish person who claims to be a religious Jew has the right to say, I don't care about American law or British law or French law or Israeli law, because the Talmud is full of this principle that says wherever you live, you must follow the laws of the country you live in. Now, if the country you live in, the laws conflict with a Jewish law, for example, if a country says you must work on the Sabbath, or a country hypothetically says there can be no slaughtering of kosher animals, which some countries have done, have outlawed kosher slaughtering, then obviously you have a real conflict and a real problem. But other than that, when it comes to civil law and financial law, paying taxes, all of those things, a religious Jew is being acting completely against Jewish law if he or she says, oh, I don't care about that. I'm going to keep Shabbat and I'm going to keep kosher and I'm going to pray a lot, but I don't care about these other laws and rules that have to do with money and financial law and business law and things like that. That's a total misreading of Judaism, but unfortunately it does exist. And so I would be the last to tell you that the stories that were recounted to you, I wish I could say I'm positive they didn't happen, but I would be the last person to tell you that they didn't happen. I'm aware of such situations myself. And now I would only say this: if something is technically not illegal and a person does it, but it's immoral and unethical, that is bad, and that can lead to a desecration. We talked about Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name, but the person might be able to say, yeah, but it's not illegal. I'm not violating a law when I return a bicycle. Might be true, but they're certainly doing something that is so blatantly unethical and immoral and presents them in such a negative, terrible way that it's really highly, incorrect to act that way. But people are people, whether they're Hasidim or whether they're other types of Jews, or whether they're not Jewish at all. I believe all over the world, people are looking sometimes for ways to beat the system, quote unquote. And these people think they found a way to beat the system. Meanwhile, they're not following the true values of Judaism, unfortunately.
Yeah, he also mentioned that there were some situations where apartments had been redone, fixed up, and these Hasidim would make them tear everything down because they would say Goyim had lived there.
I'm not familiar with anybody,
they made them take apart everything.
I don't know about anybody wanting to tear up a beautiful apartment, but I can't speak to. That what doesn't. I don't know what they're gaining by that.
Let me help out Rabbi Kahn here a little bit, because I'm not just a rabbi, I'm also an attorney. So let me come to his defense a little bit here. First of all, there's a lot of people that have it in for Jewish people, so they're quick to find negative stuff and maybe not so quick to find positive things. So let me just say,
just so you know, this guy has a Jewish wife.
That doesn't mean a darn thing. There's a lot of Jewish people who are anti-Semitic and say horrible things about fellow Jews. It doesn't impress me any, but let me just share this with you. There are many, many, many Orthodox Jews who are extremely sincere in their practice, very dedicated, and Judaism owes its existence to traditional Jews who gave their lives to preserve our heritage. Without that clinging to tradition, we wouldn't have made it. So my yarmulke is off to the sincere Orthodox who have dedicated themselves to preserving Jewish heritage. On the other hand, when Orthodox Jews especially behave improperly, it becomes even more glaring, because they, Rabbi Kahn says, well, in every society you're going to find people who do this, but these people are holding themselves out pretty much as we're religious, we're doing God's will. So when they do something
plus
wrong,
they're making the rest of us look bad too.
Exactly right.
The world.
Exactly right. They're making Jews look horrible, and they're making religious Jews look horrible. And I know for a fact that there's many religious Jews that are motivated to do great things. So that's why it's particularly harmful to Judaism and to Orthodox Judaism to do that. And there are people, there is in Jewish law, Rabbi Kahn, I'm sure you're familiar with this, there is an element in Jewish law, especially even in the Talmud, where it says that, well, you treat fellow Jews a certain way, but non-Jews, you don't have to be quite so meticulous. Even lending with interest, you're not really supposed to collect interest against a Jewish person, but non-Jews, yeah, it's okay. And there's stuff that you can do with non-Jews in the Talmud and the Torah that you wouldn't do to a Jewish person. So there's some people who are very religious thinking, hey, they're not Jewish, I can do whatever I want. It doesn't matter how immoral it is, they're non-Jews, so it doesn't really matter. Different laws apply to them. That's not a good thing. I'm more concerned with the 9 kids they have. I was a board member of Planned Parenthood. Overpopulation is a very serious problem. I'd say the #1 problem on the planet. Now, in their defense, some Jewish people say, well, we were, a third of our population was wiped out, so everybody else should be careful, but we don't need to. There's also a concept that, God's going to provide and he's going to take care of us. So it doesn't matter how many people there are on earth, God will figure out a way to deal with it. That's a very dangerous notion. So I'm concerned about the 9 kids. I'm also concerned about other things in Orthodoxy that bother me too. Like when I do an interfaith marriage, the Orthodox parents disown the kid and say, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, you're dead to me, or I'm not going to show up at your wedding because it's on a Saturday evening or something. I mean, there's certain things inherent in Orthodoxy, but there's also a lot of things inherent in modern liberal Judaism that we practice at Va-Dor that are very serious and very harmful. Like the concept that, well, I don't really need to study much, I don't really need to know Hebrew, I don't care about Jewish traditions and things like that. There's problems on both sides. And I think that we would do well to look at ourselves in a mirror and see where we're going wrong. But I will just say this, Rabbi Kahn demonstrates the best in traditional Judaism and shows us what being traditional Jewish is really all about, with values and ideals.
He's also not Hasidic. Would you consider yourself modern Orthodox, Rabbi?
Yes, but I consider myself ultimately just a Jewish person, like
There you
everybody else, and ultimately just a human being, like other human beings.
Rabbi
yes.
Kahn, I'll say you're not only a human being, you're a mensch. Now, we don't have much time left, so maybe somebody wants to wrap this up with a cogent comment or statement, and then I'll let Rabbi Kahn wants to have the last word. So I'm going to get the penultimate word, then I'll give him the last word. Who else wants to make a quick comment?
I want to make a quick comment. So give me 1 second.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So Tada Rabbah, thank you so much, Rabbi Zvi Kahn. We are so grateful to having you with us. I can't thank you enough for your tolerance of us and being with us. It's really been a blessing to have you. And I wanted to wrap it with that because we want to wish you mazel tov on your family, on your trip with your family to Israel. And may you only have blessings and goodwill coming your way and to your family. We love you. We will miss you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. When Sharon says that he's been tolerant of us, what she's diplomatically trying to say, he's been tolerant of me and my inquisition and my comments, my impudent remarks. We really appreciate that. You have been a blessing, but I'm not going to say we're going to miss you because we're going to keep in touch, and we do wish you very well. It's been an awesome, amazing experience being with you that we will always remember, something that's a highlight of the 20-some year history of Va-Dor, having this dialogue. We thank you very much, and thank you for gracing us with your presence and your display. I think the most important thing you said was just at the end when you said, "I'm Jewish," and we're all Jewish, and what a machaya to be with you. Rabbi Kahn, I give you the last word.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I, as I've said several times before during our sessions, as much as you might want to thank me, and I appreciate the thanks from the bottom of my heart, and to say that I'm what this has been a part of a highlight of 27 years, I can't even really thank you for saying that. I can't believe, that you would pay me that kind of tribute. I certainly don't think I deserve it. But I thank you guys. I thank Rabbi Silver from the start for encouraging me to join the group and to come in and to dialogue. As he said to me from the beginning, let's reason together. And he was quoting, is it Isaiah, Rabbi, you were quoting?
Yeah, 118, right.
Yes, he was quoting, and how could I say no to that? You can't say no to Isaiah. So I have been welcomed and included as warmly and as graciously as I could have wished, as anybody could have wished. And I know sometimes people feel like, oh, we might have insulted him, or that question might have really got to him. Or sometimes Rabbi Silver says, I want to come to your defense. I have never, honestly and truly and sincerely, have never felt for a moment attacked or under attack or anything like that. We're just talking, we're sharing ideas and views. We accept the fact going in that we differ, that we have different ideas. And that's what it's all about. Different people with different ideas being able to express those ideas openly and feel like there's no issue of anybody being attacked or criticized for their viewpoints. We are entitled to our viewpoints, and it's great to be able to share them and discuss them. So I love being a part of this. I hope I'll be able to participate in some way after the summer. And I can't tell you the details, but I also have a secret little plan in mind that I discussed with my wife that might allow us to meet in person without masks. If you want to wear a mask, it's okay, but without computer screens between us. It's time to get together and actually meet each other in person and talk and share good times. And I've heard the rabbi has an excellent collection of scotch, and so I want to make sure that gets brought out, and we'll have to see how that goes. But anyway, I'm going to miss this tremendously, and I hope that we can continue our contact.
Hey, Rabbi Kahn, I don't know if you noticed this, but if you look at the number of participants, we got you a minion. We got 10 participants right there. In your honor, we got a minion. Thank you very much, Rabbi Kahn. We'll see you in the future.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. To see you again.
Thank you.
Rabbi
Mazel tov.
Rabbi Kahn,